I think for the preparation aspect, for me, it's quite straightforward since basically from PhD, I've been on the ocular background on neuroscience, right? I haven't really strayed from them. So pretty much my core knowledge in that field is still what I apply in my job. I know there's a lot of postdocs who, did, I don't know, let's say migration and slime molds, right? I mean, there's so many things you can do in science, and in industry, a lot of them will go to, one of the big fields, oncology, diabetes, I don't know, things like that. And the reason that works for most people is that industry is mostly interested in your skills, right? And when it comes to skills, if a recruiter looks at your CV, it's all about, well, I need somebody who can do flow cytometry, that has experience in imaging and has worked with this model system. If you can check those 3 points, the recruiter, who often doesn't have much of a scientific background, doesn't care that that was applied to something entirely different. And that's how most people then get hired out. Ultimately, their skill sheet is what sells them, not their publications, not necessarily what they've done in their field, but those things. Now, if you've been a young investigator who started their own lab and you transition at a higher level, then publications, other things might be a bit of a different story. But for most people who either leave right after PhD or postdoc, it's all about the skills. And that's if you're, for example, on the fence about like, oh, should I do a postdoc? Should I not? Most of the times, especially if you leave right after PhD, companies are willing to train you in your position. And that oftentimes means if you can fulfill certain skills for a job you're looking at, there is no need to do more postdoc because, oh, you might get that other paper out. Because the paper is that one thing they really don't care about. I can tell you, since I've left academia, nobody has asked me about my publication ever. Like, that's the core thing. The other thing, I guess, that really prepared me, and that's more on the postdoc times, my supervisor at the time, trying to get grants and other things, was really focused on networking and making sure that when you go to conferences, if you can, you do a poster, you do a presentation, you talk to people, you go and ask questions at other talks, and you try and engage. And I think that's been really crucial for me, because really going out there and talking to people is why I have the job that I have now. Because if I hadn't had that good connection with them, they wouldn't have come up at that next conference and been like, look, we have somebody who we might refer to you to talk to because we had a good relationship. And that's kind of how that works. And that's another thing to bring up, is really that networking kind of sets you up for later on. And not just going to the PIs. I think that's one thing I like to kind of share, is like, when you're at the conference, don't just talk to the PIs, because they're going to retire eventually, especially the ones that are really old already. But the people that are your age group, because some people are always like, oh, it's a waste of time. You just hang out with the people your age, with your friends, basically, and don't do anything. But by the time you're going to have an established career, they are also all in the age where they have an established career. So somebody you're going to be actively working with are those people. So don't discredit that, don't discount that, and kind of basically spread the contacts you have as far and wide as you can. I think that's what I would say for that. Yeah.
If you want to become a patent attorney, or if you want to work in patent law, you have to have a degree in STEM. So that's, any kind of science, engineering, technical kind of background. You have to really understand that science background, because you're going to be exposed to clients' inventions in areas that you do not know. So my background, like I said, is in chemistry, medicinal chemistry, cell biology, but I work on client projects and inventions across huge spectra, like all the way through to like AI and things that I'd never had any experience with before. So having that baseline scientific knowledge is super important. And having sort of an interest in law is obviously very important. There's no point going into a patent law job if you've got no interest in sort of the law side of it. But I'd say that specifically having the PhD and the postdoc prepared me by giving me a really great baseline in science across like quite a broad range of science, but also learning how to prioritize my projects, juggling things at the same time, writing papers, like that's really important, being able to write well. So I'd say, yeah, they definitely helped.
do a lot of writing, so it's something which I really actually enjoyed during my time in academia. So that's something I definitely did love and wanted to pursue a bit more of. So I had heaps of writing experience during my PhD and postdocs. So that included my thesis writing, writing my own research papers, also being able to contribute to writing and editing for other people as well. So other people in the lab, either previous members who had left or people who didn't want to write up their work. I was actually contributing to that as a postdoc as well. I also wrote up grant applications. So grant applications are really helpful with being able to kind of work out what was really important to convey in research. And also I've prepared ethics applications for both animal work and also for human subjects. So I think that's kind of also really helpful. It's just being able to understand the different kinds of writing in an academic environment and seeing how that could be applied. I also developed skills. I had a very broad exposure of skills during my PhD and postdocs, which allowed me to think about how other types of skills like project management and also engaging with collaborators or clients could actually be also very useful for this kind of job. So basically, it's do you have the skills to lead projects, which most people doing a PhD or postdoc do have. It's just being able to actually say it in that way. And also engagement with collaborators as a potential way to say, oh, I can actually do these interactions with key clients and stakeholders. So I think that's something, just thinking about how you could take your academic skill set would be very valuable. I also took on other opportunities around the lab in both of my postdocs. So my time at NIH and my time at ANU, and also my time as a PhD student. I actually went above and beyond in the time that I had spare. And I ended up taking on a lot of administrative jobs around the lab, management, organizing mouse colonies, supervision, etc. And I think that all really helped to be able to build a skill set as well.
Academia is the least amount of income you'll ever make. Nobody cares about your publication. It might be quite the opposite. Some companies, especially startups, might still publish, but they are very strategic if they do. So in industry, time is always more important than money. So really, it's like, I mean, there's the saying, right? We can solve it by tossing money at it. And even if money is limited, like in some of the startups, they rather invest the money to have the data sooner, because as soon as they have the data, there's again the hope to get more money from it. Whereas in academia, it's always like, oh, it's going to take forever. We're going to have another little bit of this, a little bit of that. So they're really the time aspect is getting much more crucial.
I would say, so everything I do now is for, on behalf of, in the best interest of a client. So they are the most important person in every decision that is made. The science isn't yours. So when you're coming onto a project, you have to, if it's something you've never looked at before, you have to really get up to speed very quickly, and you have to be really curious and diligent about finding out what is actually important to know to help your client, because we all get sucked into black holes of reading papers and figuring things out, and being able to sort of prioritize, actually know what do I actually need to read in order to figure out how to best serve this client. That's a skill that you end up having to sort of learn on the job. So you're being more like logical in the approach rather than sort of, I feel like as researchers you can get quite emotionally attached to your work. So there's a much more like logical approach to it. And also just the amount of science that you see. So, as a postdoc, I was at Harvard Medical School. It is an enormous institution. There is so much research happening, but I was at Scapin's Eye Research Institute. So I saw my work, my colleagues' work, sort of institutional work, but you don't really ever see like the broader picture. Whereas in this kind of job, you see the breadth of science and the breadth of cool discoveries that you are seeing on it. It's fascinating. It's really interesting seeing everything that people are coming up with that nobody else is going to know about for like at least the next year. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of differences which I think are very easy to see in my role. Been here for 5 months now, so I kind of think, okay, well, there's definitely some key differences that I can notice. I guess the biggest one is that it's very deadline driven. So we're responsible for delivering projects on time and hold ourselves accountable to it. So I think in academia, you do set yourself certain deadlines, or you do have kind of these soft deadlines that you want to meet for yourself. But I think in this kind of being in industry, I think you definitely have to set these deadlines and meet them. So that's something which is definitely very important, and it's an important skill to learn during your PhD and postdocs if you can. And just like, again, practice holding yourself accountable, because I think that's something which is good. If you set yourself a deadline and say, okay, well, why didn't I meet this deadline? Or can I do something differently to meet this deadline next time? That's a really, really big part of the job. It's a very professional setting. So I think the other thing is, I think in academia, I always thought maybe, you speak it like an academic language, but I feel like in an industry setting, it's really, there's a lot of discussions around the business side of science. So I think being able to familiarize yourself with the language that is being used is very similar to kind of other big companies where they actually use, they use deliverables, and they kind of talk in a different kind of language. So I think being able to understand that, and when you're doing your client interactions, being able to go into a meeting and understand how they like to communicate, I think is a really big thing. So that's something I definitely notice is different about academia versus industry jobs.
Stay dedicated to your science and kind of the mindset and curiosity. Now, on the other hand, I would say don't become too trapped in your field. The higher up you get, especially in small companies, you're gonna have to wear more hats. So that means you need to be more open to other topics, other research, and you got to be able to engage people like that. The other thing, and I think try and share that a bit in the story as well, I think that's important, is to kind of understand and get a new perspective as like how the horizon kind of needs to shift over time as to what your goal is, really what the aim is of what you do. Because I felt like when I was a PhD and a postdoc, the goal was to cure the disease, right? It's always the goal in a sense, right? You're sitting there, you're doing something translational, but your idea of curing the disease means your experiment in the labs works and you think you're giving this compound and it made the phenotype look better. And if that would just happen, then you've cured the disease, right? That's the end of your horizon in a sense. And you're somewhat aware that things need to go beyond that. It's going to have a clinical trial at some point, but that might be the furthest you're thinking. Now, as I transitioned to industry, it very quickly became clear that you need to be aware of what the horizons ahead are in order to, change what you're doing right now. For example, me having background in cell therapy, a lot of people are like, oh, you need the cells by themselves, they're not doing so well. We might have to add some drugs to make them feel better, go through the process. Now, you can think about that, but then everybody in industry will tell you, well, the FDA is going to let you do maybe cells in one compound, but if you add another 10 that can work in your lab, but the FDA is not going to run a clinical trial that's set up like this, because it's either going to be prohibitively expensive or they're not regulatory wise like set up to deal with anything like that.
I guess if you're interested in that kind of job, taking the patent bar before you apply to the job, absolutely not necessary. Firms are very happy to take people on with no legal experience. Like I had some in that I had worked for a tech transfer office and I'd done a couple of placements with the patent firms, but the vast majority of people that come into the profession are just interested in it. They enjoy writing, they enjoy arguing, they have an interest in the law, but they don't necessarily know anything about it, and that's completely fine. The real thing is that you should be really curious about science. Like you should want to know things about other people's science. You should, that's the fun part of the job, is getting to see all of the cool stuff that people come up with. And if you're not curious about other people's stuff, if you're very focused on your own and your emotional connection to your work, then maybe this is not the right kind of job for you. But if you're curious, you've got great attention to detail, you can prioritize different projects and jump in on things to help out other people on different clients, that you've got no scientific background in that area at all, then yeah, I think this is probably a job that you should consider.
So I think as a medical writer, so that's what I'm doing at the moment, but in this medical affairs kind of role, I think you really need to have an interest in clinical research and in medical writing. So I think you need to really love writing, because we do a lot of that. But also, as I mentioned, doing some of the other things like project management, interactions with collaborators, clients, and clinicians, and wanting to make an impact that's in the company, I think is definitely going to be very useful. If you are interested in these things, this could be a good career path for you. The other thing as a medical writer specifically is that it would be really good if you like remote work. It's not always possible to be based somewhere with an office, and I think that's the biggest thing around medical writing, is that it's actually easy to find jobs because you can find them anywhere. But the problem is that you need to be okay with working remotely. So right now, the nearest office to me is in Sydney, which is about 3 hours away from where I am in Canberra, which is actually okay because I can make the trip up every now and then and just kind of say hi and interact with my team members and colleagues. But I think being able to actually have the flexibility around working from home is also really important.
So the one thing, and that might have been out there, I think, a bit between the lines, and that ties back to saying, you know, for me, academia kind of broke down once I had a kid and the pandemic came in. I would kind of challenge you to go to your daily structure and treat it as a 9 to 5. And I'm going to expand on that, because I know when you first tell the academic you should treat it as a 9 to 5, you immediately go into the discussion of, you don't have enough commitment, this is not a 9 to 5, you need to give in more hours, you need to do more. And it's immediately taking something as a 9 to 5 as being perceived as, I don't know, the new quiet quitting or whatever you want to call it. But I would challenge you to see it really as something different. As your life progresses, right, most of us, we go through PhD, postdoc, we don't have a family, we don't have other things to take care of. I can tell you daycare is open from, 8 to 6 at the maximum. And once you have a child, those will be the hours you have available, if you're in academia or not. So you're going to have to learn to be very efficient within the time you have. So that's one thing. And the other thing is kind of treating it as a 9 to 5. I think for me comes really with the challenge to say, what do I really need to do? What's essential to do? And how can I streamline to kind of fit into the time scale? If it cannot be molded into a normal day schedule, it is not happening in most cases. And the other thing is, most of the time, and that's what something I mentioned before, we always think our time is unlimited. And that's why a lot of times, oh, this didn't work quite well, I'm going to do it again. I do it a little different. And ultimately, the one study that we need to get done gets run 20 times. And that's really where that's why it doesn't fit into 9 to 5, because instead of doing it once, fully planned, we're doing it 20 times, just a little different, just a little thought over, and kind of getting out of this loop at treating kind of your time as the most invaluable resource that's out there. I think that's something important to learn. And with that comes learning to delegate, having others do things, and living with the outcome. If it's not robust enough to be fully planned and executed, and you then live with the result, you cannot proceed. I really also kind of next level learned that the hard way now, since my only on-site lab work is when I commute to San Diego, which is the other side of the country. So if I'm there for 5 days and I have to do an experiment, it's that one shot. You're not doing it twice. We're not paying for it 3 times to fly you out there and do this. So, the level of planning and execution kind of needs to be there to have it. And if the answer is no, then the answer is no. And I think that's something I also like about industry, is that when you've done everything to a certain margin of, standard that you want to do, and the answer is no, then we all understand that it is no, and not we will go back and you try and redo this until we can make the answer yes, because we really think that's what it should be.
I mean, even little things like doing the MoFo Harvard biotech sort of patent course, doing signing up for office hours. So sometimes just emailing somebody at a patent firm and saying, hey, do you just have half an hour? Like, I know you're super busy. Do you have half an hour to just have a quick chat about where I am, what I'm thinking about, you know, potentially me moving into patent law? And we're very happy to do that. Like MoFo are big on people signing up for office hours and just having like a half an hour chat with somebody to sort of see, you know, why they think they might be interested, or just sort of like having a chat about what do you do in a day, like what is your normal well, no one has a normal average day, I think I've discovered in this job, but what is your sort of normal average day look like, and what kind of things do you work on, and what kind of things do you discuss at work? So I see even something simple like, yeah, sending an email asking about an office hour, I would highly recommend, because it just gives you that little personal insight, and it's networking as well, right? Then you've reached out to somebody in a firm, you've got a name, you've got a connection, they know who you are, they know that you're interested, they know that you've put in that little bit of effort that maybe somebody else hasn't done. So I think it's all about, yeah, a little bit of networking and a little bit of putting yourself out there and maybe being a little bit uncomfortable, but in a safe, good environment.
So I'd say there's a couple of things on my list which would be very, well, I guess, pretty important stuff that you can already do at various stages, even if you're a PhD student or if you're doing a postdoc. Picking up writing experience where possible, I think, is definitely number one on the list. Anything counts here. So, you know, write up a paper, volunteer to do some editing, you know, write up that grant application. If your lab is looking for a person to help with animal ethics applications, contribute to that. These things will all help you kind of build your skills in being able to know how a formal document is written up. And I think paper writing, I think, is really helpful for that. In kind of introductory roles to like medical writing, so as an associate medical writer, you'll usually be trained pretty well in this kind of thing. But it still helps to be able to show that you are capable of writing before you go into an interview. I would definitely encourage you to take on extra tasks around the lab. Although these may take time, if you have time and if time permits in your day, I definitely recommend being able to contribute to the wider lab or the wider organization. So don't just think about the research, but also think about what are the soft skills that you can learn. And this is leading into the next point about transferable skills. And I actually have a list here of transferable skills that I'm going to read out, which I'm not going to spend too much time on, but I wanted to say that this is useful for not only this kind of job, but any kind of job. So any employer will be looking for these skills. You don't have to have all of them, but you do need to know how to articulate your experiences and how they might be able to help. So from an academic point of view, these are the things that you could say. So communication, this could be presentations, writing, and we actually usually have pretty strong skills as academics in terms of communication. Problem solving and logical thinking. These we also develop basically from the time that we're doing our PhDs. We are analytical, we're creative, we're thinking about how to solve problems. And I think that's something that's also an easy sell for us. Teamwork. We always work with labs. We always work in collaborative environments. You are constantly collaborating with other labs. And if you are on any committees or if you're on any kind of other societies, these are also kind of teamwork settings. So I'd say sell those skills as well. That's definitely something which is very valuable. Self-motivation, being able to take the initiative and take on some of these extracurricular activities, as I mentioned, taking on those lab duties. Although they may be such a pain, it's definitely worth doing because you can show that you're part of a wider, you're contributing to the wider organization. The ability to work under pressure, I think, is a really big one, and being able to meet deadlines. We do this as part of our thesis writing. If you're doing any grant writing, you will also have this down, and definitely sell those skills. Managing competing deadlines. All of these things can be sold in terms of this skill. Work ethic. And this is something which is not to be, it's not to be trivialized at all, but I think creating a positive workplace and being a positive person and showing dedication to the role really can make a difference and can help you get over the line in an interview. Dependability, they want to know that your projects can be done on time. So example, again, your thesis or certain papers, set yourself those deadlines and adhere to them. Adaptability and autonomy is another one that we've definitely learned during the pandemic. And I think during the pandemic, we got put through the ringer with COVID and being able to work from home, having to change our style, having to change the interactions we had with our team. So definitely draw on this experience, because this is very helpful, that future employers know that, you know, you are autonomous and that you are actually able to be adaptable. Leadership. Can't stress how much this one is important, but look for opportunities to be on committees and leadership. So this is something which definitely helped in my career. I had quite a bit to do with ISER in committee roles and on the council. So I think this is something that was really helpful for me, and I definitely recommend you look out for those opportunities. Take the initiative. And finally, organization. I think that's something which being well organized can be something that is going to lead you a long way. There's something else on this list which is a little harder to kind of develop, and that's self-confidence. I'm still learning how to develop that, but I think that's also something which can come across in interviews if you are going out for that new role. Self-confidence can be a huge one. So come up with a story for all of these transferable skills. Have a think about how it actually might apply to your own experience, and be confident with that list. And then you will actually realize how you might be able to actually transfer your skills from academia to industry. This is often one of the things as academics we're very unsure about. So with medical writing, it also is very applicable that you can think about those skills and how you could actually apply those to a career as a medical writer.